Welcome, everyone, to our Women in RCC session on the importance of mentorship and developing your career path. We are really very lucky today to have such a great panel before you representing all different career paths of industry, government, ASCO, advocacy, and all of the things that people in the room are interested in pursuing with their careers. And so without further ado, we will go ahead and start this program. And we appreciate all the women and allies. This session really has grown in the last 2 years from a very small, intimate group to now all of you. So we really appreciate you all attending. I'm Tian Zhang. I'm a GU medical oncologist at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas. And this is my co-chair.
Hi, I'm Ulka Vaishampayan from University of Michigan. Welcome and glad to see all the support we are getting for this exciting panelist session.
Great.
Okay.
All right, so why women in RCC? This group really was formed a couple of years ago at this point, and we believe it does empower and elevate our women oncologists in kidney cancer to lead and succeed through not only training, but also coaching and mentorship across our institutions, providing open forums for discourse and a lot of camaraderie within the kidney cancer family. It's grown from meetings at IKCS to multiple events throughout the year, and we are really privileged to have had the opportunities to gather at GU ASCO, at IKCS, and also in virtual format through the summers. We had a Women in RCC discussion session where we really highlighted the research done by our early career women at ASCO. And these allies of our initiative are also very welcome, and you are all invited to attend our sessions to listen and learn and participate. And we are particularly thankful to our industry sponsors, Exelixis and Pfizer, without whom we couldn't do this program. So here are today's panelists, and we'll go through one by one to introduce them. I'll let you start.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I do want to mention that we do some interim programs that are virtual, and we are giving one of the surveys that we did showed us that women are looking for platforms. They're typically not invited to present their research, so we're doing a platform grand rounds type of presentation with multiple junior faculty researchers who get to present their work, and we have a pretty good discussion around it. So feel free to follow us for those virtual presentations as well. And every ASCO GU, we have a program we started with last year, and this ASCO GU also, we have a sort of certified coach and instructor who does a specific session. And last year's topic was harnessing stress. So if you missed that, that was a phenomenal topic. And now this time we have it all on communication. So stay tuned for that, which really we need to improve our ways of communicating with each other. Okay, but I'll go ahead with today's program. And today it's our pleasure to have Dr. Julie Grelo open up our program. She has had a really varied career path, and each step of that, honestly, has been very inspiring, in my opinion, and you guys, I'm sure, will feel the same. She is currently the Chief Medical Officer of ASCO, and she's a professor at Fred Hutch in University of Washington, a breast cancer researcher. In addition, she started a Women in Empowering advocacy group, so this is perfect to hear from her about her experiences and how she has maneuvered and done these amazing things. Thank you, Dr. Grelo, for being here.
Thank you, Ilka. Thanks for having me. I do feel a little bit like a fish out of water, having spent 30 years as a breast medical oncologist and now being here surrounded by kidney cancer experts. But in my 3.5 years now that I've been at ASCO, I am becoming de-differentiated again. So I was asked to talk about a few slides on my own career path and then what ASCO is doing to promote gender equity in the workforce. These are my early mentors. When I was an undergraduate at Stanford, I wanted to spend a few years before applying to med school. I had just met my husband, who was my classmate. We both thought we wanted to go med school. We weren't really quite ready to apply together, but we weren't ready to apply separately either. So we said, let's take a couple years and we'll build up our CVs. And I found a job making monoclonal antibodies in the 1990s, 1980s, in the Bay Area, and ended up in an oncology lab. I just was looking for jobs where I could get some experience, buff up my CV a little bit. There was a technician job in an oncology lab. Rich Miller had just come out of fellowship in Ron Levy's lab. And so I ended up there. I mean, I was the technician. I made antibodies. I ran the fax machine. And they, to their credit, and this is where we need our allies and mentors, they included me on a New England Journal of Medicine paper before I even went to med school. I mean, you know, to give that kind of credit and opportunity is really amazing. So, you know, I thank them all the time. And then did internal medicine in Boston and came back to the West Coast, and in my fellowship and early career had another two male mentors, Bob Livingston and Mac Cheever. Bob, my division chief, and Mac, whose lab I went into, and then Gabe Hortabaji through SWOG. So, you know, Bob Livingston got me the connection into SWOG and said, here's a little trial. It's kind of prepackaged. Here, you take it and run with it. And then Gabe became the chair of the breast committee in SWOG. I became vice chair and then ultimately executive officer for breast and lung cancer over the years. But through that, you know, and I point out this one study, my big study that I did through SWOG, a 6,000 patient study, which ended up being neutral. Not really negative, we learned from it, but neutral. But, you know, the first idea for it was in the late 90s. And then because different drugs, the osteoporotic agents and bisphosphonates were being approved, it got changed a couple times. And it finally opened in 2006, and it published in 2020. So that's a long commitment. Now, I was doing other things along the way, but I also point out that, especially to early career faculty and trainees, because, you know, for these big trials, it does take a long time. So you got to be doing other things along the way. Early career influences, now when I'm a junior attending, were cancer patients. And I thought I was going to have my own lab and also be a clinician, because that's what Ron Levy, whose lab I had been in and who was my early mentor, did. And then I realized I can't be excellent in the lab and excellent in clinic, and I got interested in clinical research. So kind of shifted my thinking. And because of a project I chose in the lab that I was in during fellowship, which was this interesting new oncogene that seemed to be associated with aggressive breast cancer called HER2. So we, I was doing work on that, and then of course we had, showed that antibodies to HER2 could shut down cell growth and division, and then we had trastuzumab approved. So I was very interested in breast cancer. So I said, I think I just want a breast cancer clinic. And what would happen was my mentor, my division director, was also a breast cancer doctor. And when he would go on vacation or go to give talks, I would see his follow-up patients. And I found they would bring in bags of supplements and say, I could never show these to Dr. Livingston, but I thought you might be willing to help talk me through this. And then also they would tell me, and then my own patients over time would say, when I finished my last chemo, and you say, oh, good, now you only have to come in every 3 to 6 months. Like, I feel stranded out here. You've been taking me through all this adjuvant chemo. So anyway, with that, I started projects with patients. We were asked by the Dan Skimmerman's Triathlon series, who's one of the key people of it, her mother had died of breast cancer. So she said, if we give you money for training and we give you free registration, do you think some breast cancer patients would like to do a triathlon? And they can do any piece of it. Like the the one I was most proud of was pushed her wheelchair around the 5K walk. You know, you can do any piece of it, you can do it as a team. So we did that back in 1995, and then after people crossed the finish line, they waited for the rest of the team and said, you know, this training, all of us talking together while we're walking, talking, biking, swimming, you know, we don't like to sit in a room around a table with a social worker for support, but this is a support group, so let's do something about it. So we founded Team Survivor Northwest in 1995 to get fitness opportunities for women patients with cancer. And we're about almost up to 30 years now, and I'm still the team physician. They are so structured. They have a board. They have an executive director and all. They don't really need me anymore. I'm almost a mascot, if you will. But that was really important. And I climbed mountains with them, and I did triathlons and rode our bike from Seattle to Portland in a 200-mile bike ride. You know, you really hear your patients' fears and when you're sitting at 10,000 feet on Mount Rainier, and they start talking about, which one of us do you think is the first who's going to die? Because they were all cancer patients. And, you're hypoxic at altitude, and you've got a big day tomorrow, and it's like, that really hits home. And do you know who in the group was the first to die? The 20-year-old, one of the crew, the guides. He then went up to McKinley, Denali now, and was blown. He untethered himself, and a big wind came. He was trying to help somebody, and he was blown off. So that we all went to his funeral, and that was the irony of it too, was just because they were diagnosed with cancer didn't mean that they were going to be the first to die. So they taught me a lot. And then, just by accident almost, I was asked if I wanted to be a consultant on a breast cancer program in Ukraine by a local NGO called PATH. It was a project funded by USAID in partnership with the Ukrainian Minister of Health, and that was also in the late 90s. And so there, the most enduring thing out of that project was something that I didn't lead, but I helped support, which was we helped them, the clinicians, the physicians and the nurses, start talking to the patients. Because if you've ever read Solzhenitsyn's book, Cancer Ward, where everybody knows they have cancer, they're sitting in a ward that says chemotherapy ward in a cancer hospital, but you say to the doctor, I have cancer, don't I? And they say no, because that was the patriarchal Soviet way. So that was my Women's Empowerment Cancer Advocacy Network. It was bringing together the patient advocates in Ukraine with those in the surrounding former Soviet countries who were ahead of them in many ways, and to just have them tell each other how they were doing. I was the convener, and we rotated through different cities. Haven't had one since pre-pandemic. And then Africa came calling, and the Uganda Women's Cancer Support Group said, let's do one in East and South Africa. And I said, sure, so we did. So my point here, no formal female mentors along the way, but I have plenty of female role models. Plenty of allies. So during my residency, I have two of my chief residents, Jane Weeks and Paula Johnson from the Brigham. And faculty, Mary Claire King came about the same time I did to Seattle, and we've been causing good trouble for quite a while. And at the bottom, Anna Marikowski is my University of Washington president. She happens to have a vacation home near us on an island by Vancouver, by Victoria, and we do walks and we talk. And she's Cuban-American, lesbian, and came from within as a psychologist. And so she's not your typical university pick, but I've learned so much from her. And then late career, now it's my turn to be the mentor. And I just love looking at all these pictures and then meeting up with my IDEA mentees, my junior faculty, people from around the world. I was on the Uganda Cancer Institute's hematology oncology fellowship training program before I took the ASCO job. And so it's fun. So now, the pandemic happened and the CMO job came up at ASCO. And I looked at the position and I said, wow, that would be a great job for somebody. And didn't even think about it for me. I figured I had another 5 years and then I would retire, and it would be very comfortable to just stay in my job. I had done my succession planning, and all. And then I started getting texts and emails from some of my mentees along the way that said, this is you. You need to apply. Isn't that interesting? So anyway, I took the ASCO CMO job, and really what distinguished me in large part was because ASCO was ready to go global. And I had also been an affiliate professor of global health at the University of Washington all this time. So, it's a terrific job. It's a great job, and that's where I am now. So just 2 more slides. I know I'm at time. I looked at, this group stimulated me to look at what ASCO is doing promoting gender equity in the workforce. And so it's a busy slide. We can share slides. You can look at it. But we have a lot of bits and pieces. So at meetings, we have family-friendly services with on-site childcare, free registration for children. You can bring children in the meeting itself as long as you register them. We have on-site nursing rooms with refrigerators. We have a Women in Oncology blog. We've only had 1 submission to that a year for the last 2 years. I was an advisor on the Lancet Commission on Women, Power, and Cancer, and then we held the North America launch of that at our annual meeting last year and did a podcast. We raised money to give grants with our Women Who Conquer Cancer group. We have a women's networking lounge at the annual meeting. Many of you have probably been there. That is a great opportunity to hear panels and meet and connect. And then with partners, we partner in gender equity. So in the upper left, we have now had 3 ASCO breakthrough meetings in Asia Pacific. And I just love this picture that's underneath it of, we had a Women in Oncology networking session one morning. And when you think about the cultural differences and all, and this group that I thought, how am I gonna get them started talking? But once we got them started talking, they really bonded and shared. And so at our next breakthrough meeting, we're gonna have to have a whole session for them. With a group called City Cancer Challenge, which came out of the Union for National Cancer Control. We do this leadership program for women in oncology. So the second round of it just closed. We're actually selecting applicants. So for these low and middle income cities around the world that are part of City Cancer Challenge, we've had this leadership program for women in oncology, which is amazing. And you just see from Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia Pacific, all of these women who are kind of late, early mid-career, bonding together, et cetera. And then we were at the UN General Assembly where City Cancer Challenge announced action for gender equity at one of the UN General Assembly side meetings, and that'll be part of the UN high-level meetings on non-communicable diseases next year. And then I participated in an ESMO session of their group called Women for Oncology this past year, and we're brainstorming about how we can partner. So I'm sorry I went over, this is what I wanted to end with. This is the leadership program for women in oncology. So when we were in Geneva, when it got kicked off, we saw this sign that said, "Door is heavy, push hard," as we were entering for a little cocktail party. And I had just seen this on then Twitter, a sign, "Academia to women in academia. We are open, the door is just heavy." And one of the replies was, "And if you do manage to get the door open, make sure you hold it open for the women behind you. And better yet, once in a position of power, rip out that old heavy door and put in one that opens automatically." So I love that, and so that kind of became our theme in this leadership program for women in oncology. And so at the African Organization on Research and Treatment in Cancer meeting in Senegal this past fall, we took a picture with a couple of the LPWO trainees. So that's me kind of walking through the door leading, and Vanessa Eaton, one of our ASCO staff, holding the door open. And then we have our LPWO mentees kind of walking through the door behind us. And now it's going to be their turn to be holding open the door with the next round. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Grayler. That was wonderful. Next, we have Dr. Fatima Rangwala. Dr. Rangwala is currently Vice President for Late Clinical Development at Exelixis. Prior to joining Exelixis, she was trained in faculty at Duke University. She trained me, and she had spent time also at GlaxoSmithKline, Novartis, and Shattuck Labs. So welcome, Fatima.
I wish I could actually claim that I had trained Tian. That would be such a proud moment. But I had tiny, tiny little bit to do. Okay. So in terms of my career beginnings, I was an MD PhD. I mostly became an MD PhD because I also had a job in high school where it paid me to be a lab tech. And so as a result, I really fell in love with lab work and went on to do that at Chicago, where I was an undergrad, and really intended to do primarily a PhD pathway until my undergrad mentor said, you know, I would highly suggest that you do an MD PhD, the funding's better. So that's what I did. I went to Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's. I did my MD PhD, and I was a sarcoma biologist primarily while I was at Cincinnati Children's. And then ultimately, when I got into the clinic, I thought that I was just going to sort of ride through the clinic till I got back to the lab, and I ended up actually liking clinical medicine. I enjoyed people more than I thought that I would enjoy people. And so patient care started to become really of significantly greater interest. And so I chose to go into oncology. I came to Duke for all of my training as a resident, and then I was a fellow there, and then I was on faculty there as a GI oncologist for several years. And as I moved in over time, I came in really as a research fellow, and then over time I wanted to leave sort of in vitro studies. I became more involved in vivo studies, and then even mice weren't very satisfying. And then finally I really moved into the clinical trial space and was very interested in doing translational work. And that is where I ended up my fellowship. So it was quite a transition over those periods. It was also a period of a lot of soul searching because, of course, I had been recruited to Duke as a research fellow. And the intent was that I would, eventually write a K and write an R01. And I had to, during that period of time, I had to acknowledge to myself and have some difficult conversations with others about how I didn't really love the lab and I really wanted to become a trialist. And so ultimately that is what I did. I came on as a GI oncologist, primarily did hepatobiliary, panc, cholangio, and colorectal, and did several formative experiences as a clinical trialist. I did ASCO's Cancer Camp, which was a great experience. I sat on our IRB and our cancer protocol committees, and ultimately the Cancer Camp trial that I wrote did eventually get funded as an IST. And I was very proud of that work, and I'd also become very familiar sort of with my clinical practice. I had built it, and I was very happy. We had a very supportive GI oncology group at Duke. But ultimately, I didn't have the patience that Julie did. And I was like, wow, I can do this IST, this stupid IST that nobody is ever going to look at. Or I can write the trials that I really want to write. I can really write the trials that I feel like will ultimately change the standard of care for oncology patients. And I started to think about, industry positions, and a couple of early people were very formative in that decision for me. So at this point, I am really starting to think about, who are mentors that I connected with? Somebody connected with me with the head of clinical development at GSK, a woman named Lenny Pandit. There was also somebody who had actually done a lot of the lapatinib development at GSK, a gentleman named Neil Spector, who was at Duke, who spent many hours discussing his journey at GSK and why he had loved the process of drug development there. And this sort of group of people really made me think about, there's this complicated diagram here, but it's this coaching diagram that is often used about, what do you love? What are you good at? What can you be paid to do? And then what does the world need? And I was very focused on that research. Like, how could I bring research and my love for research and clinical medicine together? And did the world need me to do more? And that was ultimately what led me to make the transition to GSK. This was, back in 2014. They had just gotten approval for their dabrafenib and trametinib for BRAF V600E mutant melanoma, but they actually brought me in to do all the non-melanoma indications. And then originally I wasn't planning to take the job, and then when I interviewed, I was like, I love this job. There was another influence in my life at the same time. My sister is also an oncologist. She graduated out of Penn and then went straight to industry to Merck, and she got assigned to this program called Keynote 001. And ultimately went on to do all the lung filings for Pembro. And she was like, Fatima, you should really look at this. This is actually really cool. And so I ultimately went to GSK a month after I joined GSK. So this is like 12 weeks after I've given up my entire clinic at Duke. They announced the divestiture of their entire oncology portfolio to Novartis. And I got sold along with that entire portfolio. And I was like, shit. I was like, my husband, we are not moving to New Jersey. Ultimately, I stayed at Novartis for 3 years. I actually did the file for anaplastic thyroid cancer. Obviously, I knew nothing about anaplastic thyroid cancer. In the meantime, I also went back to the Durham VA, and I am still a staff physician at the Durham VA for once a week, where I staff the Fellows Clinic. And it's been a great journey for me. I subsequently did early phase development at Shattuck Labs, and then I went later on a little bit more than a year ago, I took on the position at Exelixis as the late phase clinical development lead. I have really, really loved drug development. And I am happy to have, detailed conversations with people who are industry curious, because there's lots of nuances. There is a role for, obviously trialists have a role, people who want to transition as trialists, but there are also roles for people who, in academics focused on the preclinical space, people who were health services researchers, and pretty much everybody in between, there is a role. Overall, there are lots. Exelixis has been very, very supportive of women throughout their career journey. This is just a picture of me and my family. This has been a great lifestyle and intellectually stimulating role for me throughout my career. I have learned a tremendous amount from the people that I have worked for. I honestly find that the world has told me what I needed to do. This has been a great fit for me. Exelixis supports women in oncology through numerous benefits programs. We have resource groups, women's resource groups. We also have, specialty women's resource groups, including like South Asian women. We have a number of benefits that support people at different stages in their life. And we also have a number of structured and unstructured development and leadership opportunities. And I do try to think about the heavy door. Obviously, I'm in a position now where I can really look for young faculty members, junior faculty, and also, women, and try to really promote their work. So thank you.
Okay. So our next speaker is Dr. Naomi Haas. She is no stranger to anybody in kidney cancer. I could almost award her the title of adjuvant queen. But anyway, anytime I think of Okay, but she is professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, UPenn, and director of the prostate and kidney cancer program. And she is very well known, of course, for her research in all of these GU diseases, and specifically, literally every perioperative adjuvant therapy, she has led the path. So she's really a role model for all of us. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you. So my slides are a little bit more humble. And I'm just going to say that I am the example of somebody that took a long time to grow up and sort of figure out what I wanted to do, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I knew, and you'll hear some of some of this in my Eugene Schoenfeld talk tomorrow, but you know, some of what led to oncology was sort of bad luck and good luck. I went into a 6-year BSMD program. I graduated from high school when I was 17, so I was pretty young when I was doing both college and medical school, and I think a lot of, I had a lot of struggles when I was, especially in medical school, kind of, you know, doing the clinical rotations and stuff. I felt I just wasn't very sure of myself, and I'd wanted to be a veterinarian, and my mother said, well, why would you be a veterinarian when you could go to medical school? My mother always wanted to go to medical school, and, you know, of course, not a lot of people went to medical school when she was growing up and stuff. So my first rotation was in GYN, and oh my God, the resident was just screaming at me like there were 14-year-olds having babies, and I just was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. And she'd be like, don't drop the baby. And then I did an internal medicine rotation, and I was just with these two guys that were residents that they were very clubby with one another, and I just didn't fit in, and they gave me these kind of city hospital patients, and I was kind of on my own. And anyway, I got a conditional on the rotation, and I was like, oh my God, I'm just never going to get through all of this. But then I started, you know, getting getting more comfortable with things, and I didn't really, I thought I might want to be a surgeon, but surgery was very competitive for women. I mean, it was before we used, you know, goggles and stuff, and so when I was doing my surgery rotation, the surgeon would say, well, look closely, what is that? And then you let the clamp on the vasa vasorum and the aorta, and if you didn't get out of the way, you get squirted in the eye with blood. I mean, it was just really, that's just the way it was. But anyway, I decided, well, you know, internal medicine is something that I had some really good mentors when I was in high school, and that was something that I wasn't really sure I was interested in internal medicine, but there were a lot of subspecialties that you could do with that. So I went back and I did another internal medicine rotation, and I got honors that time because I was, you know, but I think a lot of mine was that I was young, and I just, in some ways, I think women these days, young women are better prepared than I think I felt for that role when I was in that role. I ended up in GU and melanoma because I was at Fox Chase, and my program director, Lou Weiner, said, well, somebody said, well, GU needs a spot, and then one of the other people left with melanoma, and Lou Weiner said, you're doing melanoma too. So that's how I ended up in those. But I was also very interested in genitourinary malignancies because one of my friends and mentors, Lisa Hensky, would always start off saying, I love the kidney, and this is why I love the kidney, and she would talk about that. And I was like, wow, you know, kidney really is very, very interesting. So, you know, as far as mentorship experiences, you know, my mentors I thought were much more casual. Like Lisa was a mentor because we would sneak out from Fox Chase lunchtime, and we would go for a run, and she would, you know, talk to me about stuff. And I guess my mentors were the people that I felt comfortable talking with. And I think that's really important that, and I have learned so much more about mentorship just with, you know, other people that I've heard talk about. And you know, I think when we think about, you know, mentorship experiences, we think that they are all formal, but I think a lot of them are very informal experiences. And what you really want to do is surround yourself with people that, you know, with different bits and pieces. It doesn't have to be one person that's going to do it all. You want to get different things from, from different people. And so that's sort of, I already talked about the internal medicine rotation and stuff, but I think when I give advice for things, things that people have said to me are, make a 6-month plan, make a 1-year plan. Think about what you want to do in 1 year and 5 years and maybe even in 10 years. You might not know. I did lab for about almost, I think it was about 5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. I was in a basic science lab, and I would work really hard, and at the end of the day, my blots would look like total crap. And I just always liked taking care of patients, but I was glad that I spent the time in the lab because I really got to kind of understand how hard it was to do research and really appreciate the amount of work and how you can't just go up to a lab person and say, well, you know what? I want you to do this for my study. I always like doing studies, but you really have to, and they have to understand how hard it is to take care of patients and to talk, and basically for patients to want to do what you think is an important question. So, going forward, there's a few things that I'm doing at Penn. I've got some wonderful collaborators and stuff. Phil is in the audience, and Celeste, and a few other people. And I think getting the right group of people, and then a lot of my involvement has been in ECOG Akron, and there I have the opportunity to mentor. But I think there are little things you can do. You can have a formal mentorship. You can sponsor people. You can also, you can just, when everybody's bugging you all day long about reviewing articles, you can make a list of junior people and give those junior people the opportunity to review manuscripts, and they can put it in ORCID, and that helps them as well. So there's all these little things that you can do that aren't a lot of work, and they really help people tremendously. So I'll end there. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Naomi. The next speaker is Dr. Lisa Hensky, so the mentor that you already heard. She is a professor at Harvard Medical School and director, Center for Lamb Research and Clinical Care, and co-director for the Pulmonary Genetics Center. So she, obviously, you heard, she loves the kidney, but she does have a favorite child, which is chromophobe cancer. So within that, she knows all there is to know, and if she doesn't know it, it's not worth knowing, is the way I look at it for chromophobe. Lisa, thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much. I actually consider Naomi one of my mentors, so I think we might have to argue that later tonight. So I'm super happy to be here and give you some perspectives on where my career has gone and how I ended up thinking about rare diseases. And I think a theme already is that where you start out may not necessarily be where you end up for all kinds of good reasons. So I always loved science and medicine, science and math. I went to Yale where I majored in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. I'm not even sure what biophysics is, but that's what my major was called. I went to Harvard Medical School and then did hem-onc at Mass General, and actually I thought I was going to be a clinical provider. But then I entered a lab. I got interested in tuberous sclerosis, and that turned out to be the thing that's really kept my interest all along. I'm now, I guess, 80 or 90% lab-based, but I do have 2 half-day clinics, one at the Dana-Farber, where I see kidney and prostate cancer, and then one at the Brigham and Women's, which is my home base, where I see LAM, the lung disease, Birt-Hogg-de-Bay syndrome, and some tuberous sclerosis. So this is the thing that changed my life. This is one kidney from a woman with tuberous sclerosis who had bilateral nephrectomies because she had had so many bleeding angiomyolipomas. She was the first tuberous sclerosis patient I ever met over the telephone. She was having a bilateral nephrectomy at Walter Reed, and I collected tissue from her. And these tumors are just so interesting. We still don't understand them. They're called angiomyolipomas because they have blood vessels, smooth muscle cells, and fat. We know those all arise from a common clonal origin, but we don't know what the cell of origin is. There's so much that we don't know. We don't know why this mesenchymal tumor is occurring in the kidney to begin with. So then, because women with LAM get angiomyolipomas, I got interested in LAM. And LAM is this terrible destructive lung disease. It's like emphysema, but in a 30-year-old or young woman. Gets worse during pregnancy. This is one woman who I came to know who wanted me to show her image everywhere. She was a super active scientist in Boston. She was short of breath for a few years. No one thought anything was going on. By the time she was diagnosed with LAM, it was too late. She had a lung transplant, developed a post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder, and eventually died, unfortunately, when she was in her 40s. So the women with LAM who I meet through my clinical work are very, very inspiring to me and help me, stay focused in the lab. Often when things in the lab are, I often say when you see your patients, they often hug you. Your research in a lab, you don't get that many hugs. Many things don't work. So I love the balance of the clinical care and the research. So I'm the founding director of the Center for LAM Research and Clinical Care at Brigham and Women's, and that's been a really fun journey I never would have expected. So how did the chromophobe part start? Well, that's because individuals with tuberous sclerosis, if they're going to get a malignant kidney tumor, they get a lot of angiomyolipomas, if they're going to get a malignant kidney tumor, it's chromophobe-like. And that led me to become very interested, as many of you know, in the sporadic chromophobes, which don't have tuberous sclerosis mutations in most cases, and just trying to understand what's going on with those. So what I love about my work, it's very curiosity-driven. I'm always learning, and I work with fantastic people, several of whom are here today. This is a ceramics retreat class we did last summer. It turns out I am extremely bad at ceramics, but other people in the group are much better than me. So what are my sort of guiding principles for success? Well, first I would say that science and medical research overall are extremely creative endeavors. And sometimes I ask people, what are you doing when you get your best ideas? And people often say they were running or with friends or doing music. And I think you have to figure out what is it that feeds your own creativity and do that. And don't put that at the bottom of your list. That has to be at the top of your list to do what it is that we're doing to achieve the things that we're talking about at this meeting. Secondly, are you curious about it? I think we've heard from the other speakers that they were really curious about what they're doing. And if you really are curious, it's what your brain reverts to all the time. You're always trying to figure out. I'm still trying to figure out those angiomyolipomas and the chromophobes. So it makes the work you're doing really fun and intellectually stimulating. And then lastly, you have to be a little bit brave in this field. You have to be brave when you're a scientist or doing clinical research because the trial might not work. The experiment is probably not going to work. The hypothesis might be wrong. You also have to be a bit brave to enter into biomedical research because as we've heard, companies change hands and academic medicine is by its own definition a risky business, but it's actually worth it, I think, because what we get to do on a day-to-day basis is just so incredibly amazing. So I think, I love this Winston Churchill thing, I'm sure you've heard this, success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. So at the end of the day, I think what we're hearing from everyone is this is definitely a winding road. For me, that winding road has led from tuberous sclerosis to angiomyolipomas to LAM to chromophobe. I don't know exactly where it will go next. But this is a great, great time to be here doing this. There are so many breakthroughs. We're really seeing at this meeting and elsewhere real benefit for individuals living with cancer today. We have this wonderful, strong, collaborative scientific community, and there are really critical, urgent questions that we can answer as a community. And I feel very, very privileged to be part of this community. Thank you, guys.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Last but not least, Dr. Helen Moon Helen is a hematologist, oncologist at the Kaiser Permanente Riverside Medical Center and principal investigator with the Southern California Permanente Medical Group, which is an MCORP site for our NCTN trials, which is how I know her, through her great involvement with SWOG and Alliance. I once heard someone describe Helen as having access to all the kidney cancer patients in Southern California, or at least the majority of them. So thank you, Helen, for coming.
A quarter of Southern California is not the majority. So I have to tell you, my fight or flight is like boom, boom, boom going, because if you look at this entire panel and you're like, which one doesn't belong if you're in the old Sesame? That would be here.
No.
Because, yes, because
How dare you?
You know, so I will speak a bit about the oncology care in the United States, which, as we know, we see these numbers repeated over and over again. 80% of our loved ones, the ones who have cancer afflicted through a wide variety, various stages, happens in the community. Exactly. And as I think one of the voices, and there are many amazing voices for community oncologists, kind of talking about what is our space, what is our role, how can we support, how can we prompt, and that has been my life passion. Can I get my slides up? And don't be nervous, there's only 3, because at one point, I think,
You can go back.
oh, it clicked.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I-
Naomi, I win the worst slide of all time. So I put this out there for a woman because I've been addressed probably all those things, and depending on how you read the B word, maybe where we're at. So I will talk a little bit about early career, and a lot of it is going to echo what you're seeing, what you've heard over and over again. What you thought you were may not be what you end up being. And do not deadlock yourself, put yourself into a situation that has flexibility. So I would say that early in my career, meaning fresh out of medical school, residency, and the rest of that, I trained at USC, Fight On. And at a certain point, I had to very kind of vaguely, not in a clear fashion, but ask and answer these questions. Number one, we have to acknowledge that though we hear amazing mentorship a lot from famous scientists, New England Journal papers, etc., but our mentorships really start early, right? Our own mothers, our own family, professional female models, maybe that's pastors, maybe pastors' wives, and so on and so forth, of that first idea of what do you want to be when you grow up? A really vague, and it can encompass all different kind of things. And we're a great melting pot. So there are racial, cultural backgrounds. Being Asian American, what does that look like? An American immigrant story. Are you first generation, half a generation, second generation? What does that cultural heritage, burden, or benefit be? Our friendships. I grew up in a small town in Reno, Nevada. Most of my friends became poker dealers, etc. So friendships, and as they grow, so where that rural small town come from versus someone who's raised maybe in urban cores in scientific families, what that looks like, and our professional models, both male and female. And I had to kind of ask that question to myself. And that ultimately creates early in your career of what drives you, right? That first job, that fellowship, that location. And these are some of the questions that I don't think we're quite good at answering. So I've been asked to mentor fellows that have called me, female fellows, male fellows, and I've asked them this: what actually drives you? Is it fame? Do you want to be on the podium someday? Do you want to be famous on Twitter, on X, on social media? Is it prestige? Is it wealth? A lot of time in the community oncology world, we talk about academic medicine really being a privilege of people who are maybe second generation or who are economically privileged when they don't have to go out and pay that mortgage or pay that mortgage for their family or buy that car for their parents who have really sacrificed for all these things to happen. Love. Did you fall in love and want to make the commitment that you don't want to either outshine your partner romantically or maybe geographically where you should live? Or do you someone that craves stability, knowing where that next mortgage payment is coming from, knowing that credit card is going to be paid off? And at the bottom, curiosity, like, do you settle? today looking like tomorrow, looking like the week after, does that turn you on, or it sounds like the worst thing on the face of the earth, right? And ultimately, even though what I really love about that beautiful diagram that you put up, which is all very positive things about what your strength is, but what are our fears? What are you afraid of? What are you not wanting that if you have that high anxiety, the fight and flight mode, that you can't sleep at night, you can't do that. So those are, I think, a lot of things that go into early career. And certainly for myself, I've been lucky enough to answer that question. And that's why, for me, it made sense to go into a large community practice, that it checked off enough boxes. However, and I will come on to this next point, at a certain point, and this is my whole challenge to those of you that's just starting off, really give yourself the grace and gift of change. So somewhere around mid-career, when the Beamers and the mortgage, etc. happened, it turned out I woke up one day with 2 kids and some extra poundage, and it turns out I still had the fire in my belly, right? That I'm still curious. And I was lucky enough to be in a system that says, hey, no one's doing it. If you want to put your hand up and put in the hours, go ahead. We're going to let that happen. I didn't have to sell homes or make these big drastic changes. And I have count that always as a gift. And I think in mid-career, for a lot of us women, we have unique challenges. There are more personal obligations, good and bad. Dogs need to be walked, hamsters need to be found. Financially, there may be habits you got in that needs to be either maintained or so on. And there are personality challenges. If you're 7 to 10 years into any system, now you have a brand. What's your reputation? Are you the pushover? Are you the difficult one? Are you Miss, Madam, or Dame, or the other, right? So, and I think at that point, you start asking the question, does your brand of you always work? Is what worked in your 20s and 30s, hustling harder, being always that person that's naive and bright-eyed and asking maybe not the brightest question, but being able to overcome that by your enthusiasm, does that make sense in your 30s and 40s? And then there's also where you see mentorship change, that sometimes I find the younger women have a hard time with that change, because in some ways, at one point, you were the academic, the career babies, things were being handed to you. You were being protected. But now, in some ways, you're both seen as an equal and a challenge, right? And some of us have a hard time making that transition, that the person that have maybe once that go to that role now sees you as a fair challenge. And do you become devastated? Do you have recrimination? Do you take that as evidence you've arrived and go ahead and keep going with it? Have you outgrown them? Is it such that your gifts are such that you can go to the next level? And I think these are questions that we have to keep asking ourselves. And this is my last slide. So just to echo what Naomi said, what's the goal? I don't have a 1-year goal. I do want to find my hamsters. That's the 2 days goal. What do you want to be in 5, 10, 20, end of life? What do you want to see looking backwards that you would be proud of, right? What is your legacy? Is it family? What is it in totality? And I think those are questions that I firmly believe successful female scientists, physicians start with being successful females first. So.
We are really pressed for time, so we may have to move the Q&A to the room. What do
We
you
have
think,
1 or
Priya?
2 questions. We can
Should
take
we
them.
do
I
one
think
or
we have
two?
5 minutes, so if anybody.
I just want to clarify that Helen and I were sitting up here saying our slides are really crappy. So that's why that.
Well, I was going to
no
say
key
Helen
picture.
missed her calling. If she has a goal, whether it's her goal or not, she's like a professional life coach. I think she has an alternate career.
I should have put up a picture of my hamster.
Okay.
Well, this was really inspiring. Each and every one of you gave us wonderful perspectives, and I took a lot away. I'm sure everybody in the room did. So we do have a reception down the hall at Old Louisville, so I'm sure the conversations will continue, and we really welcome everybody to keep on the discussions, and hopefully we generate a lot of questions and also about career paths going forward.
Should we spend... Maybe if each of you wants to say a sentence, we have a few minutes, so let's use that to give us your 1 or 2 parting thoughts of what you think we should be thinking about and changing in how, in narrowing the diversity gap, the gender gap, and, towards success. So do you want to start this way, Dr. Hensky?
I really love the image of holding the door open, and I'm going to try to keep that in my own mind.
That's
I can give you the
fabulous.
slide.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say
Fatima?
that I love that image as well. And I think, personally, I think it is all about, the barriers that we place on ourselves as well. Keeping an open mind about, new opportunities, this concept of, fear that multiple people, mentioned. It is about sometimes embracing the unknown.
Yeah.
So I'll say another thing I found on X recently that I love and incorporate in some of my talks is behind every strong woman, ... is a whole crew of other really strong women helping support her. So making the
Amen.
point that we're all
Yes.
supporting each other and that's what we need to overcome some of the inequities.
I think just understanding your own insecurities or fears, because they can be roadblocks to both your own success, but also, recognizing when you're working with younger people that, that need help, that you have to see where you might want to delegate to other people, and to really help them the best.
I think for me, just setting the North Star, right? If you're a decent human being with the right goals, I think, thankfully, I hope we still live in a world where you can pull together a team that will keep helping you accomplish this. And I think supporting our female brains, our female brilliance to have a seat at the table, have the right seat at the table will always be a good North Star for us.
Wonderful. I heard a lot of common themes: holding the door open, where you start is not where you end up, and take opportunities when they arise, and hopefully we all continue to support each other. I want to draw your attention to two opportunities for women in RCC. One is our second cohort of professional leadership coaching. We went through the first cohort this past year. It was very well received. So those of you who are interested, please use that QR code and think about applying to be part of our second cohort in 2025. There's also a breakfast networking event at ASCO GU. We welcome you in February of 15th of 2025 in San Francisco. And Natalie Johnson from Vital Work is the life coach who will be doing that session on courageous communication. So we welcome you there too. The QR code that will have more information. And then finally, I hope these conversations will continue with the networking reception down the hall. Thanks so much.
Yeah.